Hi, Michael Yardney here, and in this week's Property Insider video, I'm going to have a chat with Dr. Andrew Wilson about the money the government suddenly found it hasn't spent on job seeker and JobKeeper and what they can actually do about it. There's lots of vested interests giving them some ideas with regard to property. We're going to discuss a bit about immigration, the latest consumer confidence figures, about how many distressed properties for sale there are or aren't actually in Australia, and then Dr. Wilson's going to give us details of his latest weekly property data, so you've got some real-time insights into what's happening in the property markets around Australia. If you like this sort of information, please click the subscribe button so you'll be kept up to date each week when we bring out our weekly Property Insider videos. And if you click the little bell icon, you'll be kept up to date when we have a new update. The government has overestimated the total cost of JobKeeper, the wage subsidy that it put in place, actually by $60 billion. And that's probably related to the unexpected success in containing the virus. This reduces the budget deficit considerably and provides scope for additional government stimulus to shore up the economic recovery that we're looking for. There are a lot of vested interests out there making recommendations to the government on how to spend their money, from glamorous, large, expensive projects to helping first home buyers get a foot in the property ladder. I'd like to discuss a number of these suggestions with Australia's leading housing economist, Dr. Andrew Wilson, Chief Economist of My Housing Market. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, and welcome to you too.
Well, Andrew, Australia's political leaders, they've taken decisive action. They've responded to the biggest public health crisis in a century. And as a community, we've done the right thing. We've worked from home. We've cut back our interactions. We've avoided the terrible health outcomes seen in other countries. And while this swift action has protected our health, boy, has it taken a serious toll on our economy. The economy's contracted sharply, unemployment's leapt, consumer confidence and business confidence crashed, even though that's picking up a bit. And even though we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel with regard to the health elements, there's still a lot of economic fallout ahead. And as I started to say, there's lots of people suggesting ways of the government helping the economy pick up, because we see a lack of immigration going forward. We see the property industry slowing down. And in the past, the property industry has always played an important part, not just in Australia's economy, but in the recovery from previous downturns. It's got this multiplier effect, hasn't it, Andrew?
Absolutely, Michael. And previous governments have used particularly the housing market as, I guess, leverage to recover economies that were suffering. And I think that the government certainly is making noises that they're going to follow that previous pattern. I'm not quite sure about some of the overview of the proposals being put forward. We'll see a lot more meat on the bones in coming weeks and months. But certainly I think that there is fertile ground for growth within the property market and specifically within the housing market. And governments would be wise to learn the lessons of history in that respect.
Well, as you said, they've announced a multi-billion-dollar scheme to construct residential housing. They haven't given a lot of details, but to put it into context, the Property Council of Australia says that property is Australia's biggest industry. It's the largest employer, accounting for 13% of Australia's GDP. And apparently the property industry provides 1.4 million jobs, more than mining and manufacturing combined. And the Property Council put a 7-point plan together for the government. And one of the recommendations they made was to give a $50,000 new home boost. The Master Builders Association gave a different suggestion, but there's a number of industry bodies suggesting just give away money to get people in the property market. Doesn't matter if they're first home buyers, doesn't matter if they're established, doesn't matter how much they're going to spend. Let's just get the construction industry going, Andrew.
Well, yes, Michael, but we are limited by the quantity of funds we have to provide that sort of stimulus. These are billions of dollars. And the government has said that it's not going to just continue to throw money at the problem. Obviously, we're going to have issues with budget deficits going forward for a number of years, but they are still reasonably mindful of keeping that within some sort of rational control. So, look, we have to be, I guess, more specific about where we do and how we do stimulate our property market. And I'm a little concerned about proposals for mass public housing initiatives. I think what we need to do is look to specific areas of demand that we know we can tap into. Previous governments, the Rudd government during the GFC in 2008, 2009, introduced the first home buyer grant boost. And of course, that was a follow-up from the Hawke government in 1983 that actually introduced the first home buyer grant. Now, both those policies were very successful. They tapped into what is always that desire for first home buyers to get into the marketplace regardless of conditions. And it certainly was a significant factor in revitalising the economy post the GFC and post 81-82 recession. So I think that we need to be mindful of looking towards specific areas of demand that we know will respond quickly to stimulus environment, such as a first home buyer grant boost, rather than undertake broad public housing initiatives. And I'm always a little circumspect about the capacity of governments to provide the sort of efficiencies that the private sector provide, particularly in construction.
Another recommendation by the Property Council was to boost or bring back immigration. They called it the Welcome to Australia Migration Plan. And I know recently Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe pointed out how important immigration is to our economy. And he was suggesting bringing international students back, visitors back, skilled workers back. That's going to boost our economy. And it's been shown on a number of occasions that one immigrant coming in actually creates 3 jobs, doesn't take away jobs from the local Australians.
But we've got to be a little mindful of the so-called pot of gold that migration provides economies. Yes, of course, it is a positive in terms of what it does in stimulating GDP, but it is a double-edged sword, Michael. We've got to understand that it does create employment supply. It brings in the demand for jobs, in other words, job supply. Now, the biggest problem Australia's economy has had, and most advanced economies have had post the GFC, has been the poor response from wages growth to particularly low interest rates. And part of that problem could have been directed at, particularly in Australia, large-scale migration. And let's remember, we had record migration 3 or 4 years ago, and that may have been a factor that provided more competition for available jobs, which put downward pressure on income. So it's not all a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, migration. And let me say, Michael, and I am a positive for migration, but it has to reflect the nature of the cycle, and it has to be specific to particularly undersupplied areas of the economy in terms of labour. But I think it's going to be a real hard sell, Michael, to be looking towards boosting migration when we've got 10% plus unemployment. Particularly, I'm not sure the trade unions are going to be very happy about that as well.
I can see there will be some diametrically opposite opinions on that. Another area I'd like to discuss a bit is the lack of distressed sales. Now, this is really good when there hasn't been a lot of mortgagee sales or distressed sales, but the property pessimists out there are suggesting that many first home buyers and investors have overcommitted themselves financially, and they're just going to have to sell up, and that's going to create a domino effect of falling property values. I see it that JobKeeper, JobSeeker has actually minimised the level of many Australians' financial hardships. And at the same time, the banks are not keen to force people to sell up their home. They're giving them payment holidays to get through these difficult times. And there's always people who've overcommitted themselves, even in good economic times. There's always going to be a percentage of people who have got mortgage stress, as some people say. But there's not even a proper definition of what mortgage stress is there?
No, but it's fertile ground for the usual headline addicts, Michael, that are again coming front and square into the media, taking advantage of what is a particularly uncertain period going forward in the economy. Of course, it is cheap clickbait, and those that are renowned for fertilising cheap clickbait certainly up and about at the moment. We don't have a history in economic downturns of high levels of distressed sales. So we learned in the 91-92 recessions, Australians will do anything to hang on to their house. A little bit different circumstances now because we don't have the lower interest rate environment that we typically get, falling rates during an economic downturn, because of course our rates are basically at zero. So we've got nothing left to throw in terms of lower mortgage rates to support our housing markets. At the moment, the prospects are for perhaps 10 to 15% unemployment, that still leaves the vast majority of Australians with jobs. And of course, the property market has proved to be robust and resilient through all economic circumstances.
I guess one of the other things is when they talk about the Australian property market, there isn't one Australian property market that's going to have distressed sales. So there clearly will be some pockets where there's going to be challenges. I know that statistics are showing that some of the young families who committed to buying new house and land packages are now having difficulty settling on those. Some investors are concerned about buying the off-the-plan properties that they committed to a while ago. And I guess in regional Australia, on the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast, where tourism is going to be an issue, there may be more investors and owner-occupiers and a little bit of distress, but that doesn't mean they're going to sell up their homes, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Interestingly, for the 8th week in a row, the Roy Morgan ANZ Bank Consumer Sentiment Survey showed we're feeling a little bit better, Andrew.
Well, yes, Michael, and so we should. We've moved better than just about everybody through the coronavirus issue. The health issues are now receding as our main focus, and we're now the main game coming forward, of course, will be the economy. And there's a lot of hard work ahead of us, Mike, but now we need to knuckle down and get our economy back up and running.
Well, they're starting to spend a little bit more as well, according to the latest statistics of people using credit cards. But I guess they're not going to spend a lot until the borders are open a bit more and they can travel a bit more. But let's look at the latest housing market data, because you update that every week. Now, let's start with the auction clearance results, which, as we've mentioned a few times, are really not as meaningful as they used to be when there was a large percentage of, especially in Melbourne and Sydney, the properties going to auction.
For what it's worth, the data is perhaps showing us that the Sydney market looks to be growing in terms of the number of properties auctioned and sold compared to Melbourne, which numbers are still very, very small.
Well, it's only early days for the Melbourne market to be allowed to have public open for inspections and public auctions. Let's now turn to your national newly listed homes index, which shows the latest number of properties coming onto the market.
The new listing index has been quite steady, Michael, over the past week. And what this reflects is seller sentiments. Sellers are still reasonably happy to bring their properties into the market. We are certainly down around about 30% from those March peaks. If we look at comparisons with a year ago, Michael, we're down around about 10%. We've got to remember, a year ago, as new listing numbers were subdued as a result of the election campaign, which had just finished.
Well, when we break it down from state to state, Brisbane again seems to have just that little bit of edge of confidence on the other states.
The bigger markets of Melbourne and Sydney have been the weaker markets, although still reasonably positive. But certainly the Brisbane market is holding its own. And I think that perhaps reflects the less that has been impacted by the actual health statistics of the virus during the shutdown.
What about home sales? You've got your regular weekly home sales index. How did Sydney go?
Well, Sydney again, Michael, compared to Melbourne, is looking just that little bit stronger. New sales are coming through still at a steady rate, similar to listings. So people are still quite prepared to purchase a property in these uncertain times. And Melbourne also is producing sales certainly a lot lower than pre-coronavirus. But as with new listings, buyer sentiment is quite stable at the moment. We're not seeing a sharp collapse. And I think that overall the statistics are showing us, Michael, that there's a reasonably steady approach to the real estate market from both buyers and sellers at the moment. The challenges are ahead, but I think we can have a reasonably positive outlook given what the current statistics are telling us. And that is really steady as she goes.
At the moment, it's doing well then, and I look forward to our chat next week. So we're going to have our longer monthly property market update where we're going to look into the property markets in a lot more detail. Thanks for your time, Andrew.
Great, Michael. Thank you.